They wanted the Sprite Lord. Xianxia knew that Sprite Palace would definitely obtain news about Snowy. But would he hand Snowy over to them? The answer was a definite no. Ding Xiaoyao rolled her eyes at him. The Sprite Palace isn't the Divine Phoenix clan. It's one of the strongest powers that are out in the open on the continent. I know, Xianxia continued, but I won't hand Snowy over. Ding Xiaoyao thought for a moment and said, then just ignore them. We won't agree nor disagree, and we'll just keep them waiting. Xianxia nodded. It was the best choice for him. Presently, he didn't want to become enemies with the Sprite Palace. After all, he wasn't able to use the Stellar Sword diagram or the Divining Flame again. Xianxia just stayed in his cultivation room throughout the next few days. Cultivating. Even though the large world wasn't filled with Rebirth Realm experts to the point that they could be seen everywhere, there were numerous experts here. He was only equivalent to a single Rebirth Realm expert while he didn't have the Divining Flame and Stellar Sword diagram to help him. Perhaps he could still kill a Rebirth Realm expert on his own in single combat, and even two may be possible, but he was absolutely incapable of fighting 3 Rebirth Realm experts. If he faced the joint forces of 3 Rebirth Realm experts, then all he could do was flee. He intended to cultivate the Sword of Rebirth. The Sword of Rebirth was stronger than the Rebirth Sword. He hadn't cultivated it in the past because of the requirements it had in terms of sword intent. His sword intent wasn't at the returnal rank, so he couldn't cultivate it. While his sword intent still wasn't at the returnal rank, he could use the Sword God Seal to improve it to the returnal rank before he started cultivating. Actually, he'd thought of this method in the past, but he'd abandoned the thought because the backlash from his sword intent was too painful. Yet now, he was used to the pain from the backlash, and coupled with the extremely dangerous situation he was in, Xianxia had decided to cultivate the Sword of Rebirth. In the cultivation room, it's best that you don't cultivate that technique. Xianxia was about to cultivate the Sword of Rebirth when Little Sky suddenly appeared by his side and spoke softly. Xianxia gazed at her with a puzzled expression. Why? She shook her head. That sword technique destroys others' chances at being reborn. It harms the balance of the world. Regardless of how terrible the enmity between two people is, it should be put an end to in this lifetime. But your technique destroys a person's next lifetime. It goes too far. Xianxia walked over her and spoke seriously. Little Sky, if my enemies like the Emperor's Sect or War Pavilion have a chance to kill me and destroy my path of rebirth, do you think they'll do it? Little Sky fell silent. Xianxia said, Little Sky, it's a very realistic and cruel world out there. Being kind to your enemy is being cruel to yourself. Little Sky shook her head and didn't speak further. Xianxia added, where there are people, there are interests to protect and improve, so there is battle. It's very normal for people to fight to the death. Little Sky, I think that you should stop being concerned about so many things. Don't live such a tiring life. Little Sky remained silent for a long time, and then she said, a very, very long time ago, the world outside was just like the world in here. Yet now, she shook her head and left the room. A very, very long time ago. Xianxia's eyes narrowed slightly. He pondered deeply for a long time, and then he shook his head, restrained his thoughts, and continued his cultivation. The Sword of Rebirth stressed upon the fusion of mind, sword intent, and soul. The Sword of Rebirth used intent as speed, the body as the sword, the soul as the support, and the eyes as the blade. Simply speaking, the Sword of Rebirth treated its user as the sword. It needed no sword. The user was the sword. The body was used as the sword, so the user was the sword. The soul was used as support, so the user's soul was treated as the soul of the sword. The user's intent was used as speed, so it represented that its speed didn't rely on profound energy or other forms of energy, but the intent of the user. It struck where the user's mind could reach. It was very similar to the sort of element that he once used in the past. Of course, it couldn't compare to the Sword of Rebirth. Most importantly, it required returnal rank sword intent. Returnal rank sword intent was its foundation. Needless to say, up until this point in his path of cultivation, the Sword of Rebirth was the most difficult technique he'd encountered. He'd spend almost 10 days before he finally got a slight grasp of the Sword of Rebirth, and he encountered numerous problems as he continued its cultivation. In the next 3 months within the primordial pagoda, besides cultivating the sword of rebirth like a madman, Yang Yi would put aside a certain amount of time to play with Snowy and Little Sky. As expected, Snowy really liked Little Sky as well, and Little Sky really liked Snowy too. Something worth mentioning was that Little Sky Flame was quite afraid of Snowy, the Sprite Lord. As a Sprite Lord, Snowy was a huge threat to a Sprite King like Little Sky Flame. Fortunately, Snowy didn't absorb her energy as she pleased because Little Sky Flame was on Yang Ye's side as well. Just like that, Snowy gradually overcame the trauma she'd suffered with the help of Little Sky and Little Sky Flame's company. Presently, she was enjoying herself every day. As for Yang Yi, his diligent cultivation was helping him become more and more skilled at the Sword of Rebirth. But he wasn't skilled enough to use it in battle yet. Presently, he was only barely able to execute it, but its strength was far inferior when compared to the strength the Sword of Rebirth was described to possess. The main reason was that he hadn't fully grasped it. He had to continue his training. Just like that, 2 more months went by. In the world on the first level, Yang Yi stood on a rock, and a boundless ocean stretched out before him. After staying silent on the rock for a long time, Yang Yi suddenly opened his eyes. OM! At the instant his eyes were opened, a sword howl shot up into the clouds. A moment later, a ray of light flashed, and then Yang Yi appeared around 500 kilometers away. A moment of silence ensued, and then the ocean was suddenly split open at the center. The rift grew larger and larger while water surged incessantly in opposite directions. The ocean water gradually overlapped and formed huge waves that stretched extremely high into the air. As for the rift itself, it was around 300 m wide. There was a wisp of excitement in Yang Ye's eyes as he gazed at the scene before him. The Sword of Rebirth's strength had far surpassed his expectations, especially its speed. It could be said that if he wanted to kill someone now, he merely had to confirm the person's position, and then he could instantly kill that person from 500 kilometers away. He was absolutely capable of killing someone from 500 kilometers away. The only depressing part about it was that it exhausted too much profound energy. That attack had exhausted all his profound energy, including the profound energy within the Worldmen's Stone. Moreover, even then, he still felt like it wasn't enough. It could be said that if he had more profound energy, then it would have been even stronger, gone even further, and shot forward even faster. Actually, it was normal. After all, the sword cultivator who created the Sword of Rebirth had been at the dualism realm, and that sword cultivator had created it based on his or her strength at that time. But Yang Yi was just a deity, so he definitely lacked sufficient profound energy to fully execute that technique. Fortunately, he had 8 energy pearls, and it represented that he could execute the Sword of Rebirth 8 times in a short period. In short, he had another trump card to protect himself with. Yang Yi suddenly looked up into the air, and then he vanished on the spot. In the outside world, Yang Yi gazed at Ding Xiaoyao and hurriedly asked, "Do you have news of Zier?" Ding Xiaoyao shook her head. "There has been no news of Zier. However, I obtained 2 other pieces of news. The Sword God's Pavilion and Sprite Palace are looking for you, and they've summoned you to their headquarters." The Sword God's Pavilion and Sprite Palace? Yang Yi frowned. When did the Sword God's Pavilion join forces with the Sprite Palace? Ding Xiaoyao replied, "You have things that both of them need." Yang Yi immediately came to an understanding. The Sword God's Pavilion was naturally looking for him because of the Sword God's seal and stellar sword diagram. They both belonged to Jian Wuji, and the Sword God's Pavilion was created by Jian Wuji. He could imagine that the Sword God's Pavilion definitely felt that both the Sword God's seal and stellar sword diagram should belong to the Sword God's Pavilion. As for the Sprite Palace, their objective was even more obvious. It was clearly Snowy. Ding Xiaoyao suddenly said, "I think you should make the trip." Yang Yi was puzzled. "Why?" She explained in a low voice. "If you go by yourself, they wouldn't dare to do anything to you no matter what. The reason I think you should go is because you can try to discuss the matter with them. Their objective is Snowy, the Sword God's seal, and the stellar sword diagram. But you can think about it from a different perspective. There's a connection between you because of the Sword God's seal, stellar sword diagram, and Snowy. so you can try to talk with them. Otherwise, if you ignore them over long periods of time, I'm afraid that the power who's pulling the strings from the shadows may use the opportunity to pull the Sprite Palace and Sword God's Pavilion over to their side and join forces against you. Xianxia thought for a moment and nodded. All right. Meanwhile, Ding Xiaoyao said, you have one other objective, and it's to see if they are puppets for that power as well. If they are... Ding Xiaoyao took a deep breath while a solemn expression filled her eyes. If they are, then that power that's acting from the shadows is really too terrifying. Xianxia nodded. The Sprite Palace was filled with sprites, and it didn't participate in the battles of the mortal world. However, if the Sprite Palace was a puppet for that power as well, then it would truly be terrifying. Meanwhile, Ding Xiaoyao suddenly said, right, I found a Nanjing. Xianxia hurriedly asked, where is she? The martial tomb. Ding Xiaoyao spoke solemnly. She's at the martial tomb. The martial tomb is a secret realm in the large world, and it's where a martial god of the past fell. The martial god's spirit resides there, so even rebirth realm experts dare not enter it rashly. I've sent people to wait outside the martial tomb. They'll tell her to rush over here immediately if she shows herself. Xianxia nodded and heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. All that mattered to him was that a Nanjing was fine and well. Xianxia didn't stay a moment longer. He bade farewell to a Nanjing, and then snuck out of Oblivion Boundary City and departed for Sword God's Pavilion. What was he the least afraid of in this world? Sword cultivators. He was the least afraid of sword cultivators. Up until this point in time, besides Jian Wuji and the Unfettered One, he hadn't seen or heard of any other sword cultivator that was more formidable than him. Even if the Sword God's Pavilion had sword cultivators with returnal rank sword intent, he still didn't fear them, because besides his sword he still had his body. Most importantly, he had the sword domain which was capable of suppressing all sword intent. After he left Oblivion Boundary City, Xianxia traveled through 2 teleportation formations before arriving at Meteor Mountain. Meteor Mountain was the headquarters of Sword God's Pavilion. A very long time ago, the area Meteor Mountain was situated at had been a flat plain. One day, a meteor fell from outer space, and the huge meteor became Meteor Mountain. Later on, after Jian Wuji arrived at the large world, he took a liking for the place and established the Sword God's Pavilion's headquarters there. Once Xianxia arrived at the foot of Meteor Mountain, a wave of sword intent assaulted his face. However, the sword intent seemed to have noticed something when it arrived 3 m away from Xianxia, and then it instantly retreated like a receding tide. Xianxia glanced at the surroundings, and then he looked up. Meteor Mountain was huge, and it was like a huge sword that was struck blade side up in the ground. Besides that, a huge violet sword was floating in the air around 3 kilometers above the peak of the mountain. The huge sword was spinning slowly, and it ceaselessly emanated violet sword energy that shot towards Meteor Mountain. The sword energy was very sharp and powerful. Unless it was a rebirth realm expert, even dualism realm experts would dare not approach Meteor Mountain from the sky. Flying was prohibited. Every single power had such a formation, and it was there because they didn't want other experts to fly over their territory. Xianxia started walking towards Meteor Mountain. Suddenly, a sword howl resounded from not too far away, and then a ray of light descended before Xianxia. The light dispersed to reveal a woman in green clothes who held a sword. She gazed at Xianxia. "State your name." Xianxia glanced at her and replied, "Xianxia. Xianxia." Her expression changed. "You're Xianxia." Xianxia. That name was naturally not unfamiliar to her. It should be said that no one throughout Sky continent didn't know that name. Moreover, everyone in Sword God's Pavilion was aware that 2 of their precious treasures were in Xiangxia's possession. Xianxia nodded. "Take me to your pavilion, master." She sized him up and said, "Come with me." Xianxia followed her towards Meteor Mountain. All along the way, Xianxia was scanning the surroundings incessantly. He noticed that some of the sword formations here were very similar to the sword formations on Dark Hell continent. The only difference was that the sword formations here were much stronger. Suddenly, Xianxia gazed at the woman. At this moment, she was sizing him up. He glanced at her and asked, "You're very curious about me?" She was slightly stunned by this, and then she nodded. "I'm very curious." Xianxia smiled and said, "Is the Sword Gods Pavilion the #1 sect for sword cultivators on the continent?" "Of course," she said. "Every sword cultivator on the continent takes pride in being able to join our Sword Gods Pavilion." She glanced at Xianxia at this point and asked, "You're the founding ancestor's successor, so you'll join our Sword Gods Pavilion, right?" Xianxia smiled. "What do you think?" She shook her head. "I don't know." Xianxia smiled and didn't speak further. Join Sword Gods Pavilion? He'd never had such thoughts. Actually, even if he wanted to join, the higher-ups of the Sword Gods Pavilion wouldn't dare to let him. There were two reasons for that. Firstly, Xianxia was too strong and had an extreme personality. If he were allowed to join Sword Gods Pavilion, then could anyone control him? Secondly, Xianxia was stuck within the eye of a storm, and his enemies were too strong. So, if he were allowed to join, he would bring the entire Sword Gods Pavilion down with him. It didn't take long for them to arrive at the peak of the mountain, and there was an imposing pavilion there. Sword Gods Pavilion. News of Xianxia's arrival seemed to have somehow spread throughout Sword Gods Pavilion. So countless sword cultivators came here. In just a short while, the surroundings were filled with almost 1,000 sword cultivators. Xianxia glanced at the surroundings. Needless to say, Sword Gods Pavilion was very strong indeed. Because all these sword cultivators had comprehended sword intent, and the weakest amongst them possessed void rank sword intent, while at least around 10 possessed rebirth rank sword intent. The sword cultivators in the surroundings were ceaselessly sizing up Xianxia. Some were curious, some admired him, and some seemed to want to provoke him. Presently, Xianxia was considered the #1 sword cultivator on the continent. So, defeating Xianxia would allow them to instantly become renowned throughout the continent. As for if they lost, it didn't matter because it wouldn't change anything. It didn't take long for a young man to suddenly walk over to Xianxia. "Xianxia, do you dare to fight me? We'll compete in our attainments in the sword Dao and not sword intent." Everyone knew that Xianxia possessed quasi-returnal rank sword intent, so he naturally intended to avoid competing with Xianxia with sword intent and only intended to compete with Xianxia with their attainments in the sword Dao. To be more precise, it was a one-on-one battle without using sword intent. Xianxia took 2 steps forward and looked the young man in the eyes. "Let's fight to the death. Do you dare?" The young man's face instantly became unsightly. Fight Xianxia to the death? Did he dare? The young man's expression was unsightly to the extreme. He kept wanting to say something, but he stopped himself when he was about to speak. Meanwhile, Xianxia patted him on the shoulder. "If you want to make a name for yourself, then rely on your strength. Don't play such tricks." The young man's expression changed repeatedly. A long time passed before he cupped his fist at Xianxia and moved aside. Suddenly, an old man walked out from the pavilion. The old man went over to Xianxia, sized up Xianxia and said, "The pavilion master requests your presence." Xianxia nodded, and then he followed the old man in. In the hall within the pavilion, there were 5 old men here. All of them were at the rebirth realm, and there was a middle-aged man in a luxurious robe seated at the seat of the host. The middle-aged man was the master of Sword Gods Pavilion, Xianxia. Everyone in the hall was looking at Xianxia. Presently, Xianxia was definitely the most dazzling sword cultivator on the continent. So, they were naturally very curious about him. Xianxia's gaze descended onto Xianxia. "I'm sure Sword Gods Pavilion wasn't just looking for me to have a look at me, right?" Xianxia spoke flatly. "Xianxia, I'll just be frank. The Sword God's seal and stellar sword diagram you possess are precious treasures of my Sword God's Pavilion. Please return them to their rightful owner." The stellar sword diagram. The Sword God's seal. A smile curled up on the corners of Xianxia's mouth. "I expected that before I came here. But I think you were mistaken to say that they belong to the Sword God's Pavilion." "Mistaken?" Xianxia continued. "They belong to our founding ancestor, Jianwuji, right?" Xianxia smiled. "So you realize that they belong to Senior Jianwuji. When did Senior Jianwuji's possessions become property of the Sword God's Pavilion?" The expressions of the others here became quite unsightly when they heard Yang Yi. Obviously, Yang Yi refused to hand them over. Meanwhile, Yang Yi suddenly said, I encountered a strand of Senior Jian Wuji soul on Dark Hell Continent. He said I possess an extraordinary bone structure and I'm a peerless genius in the sword Tao that only appears once in a million years. So, he gave the stellar sword diagram and sword god seal to me, and he said that once I arrive at the large world, I should take over of the sword god's pavilion and lead sword god's pavilion to the peak of this world. Yang Yi glanced at them and continued, These are Senior Jian Wuji's last words. Will all of you obey them? The expressions of the others here grew even more unsightly. Let Yang Yi take control? They were naturally unwilling to do so. Sword God's Pavilion was a peak 8-star power, so would anyone be willing to just give it away? After all, even though Jian Wuji had established it all those years ago, they were the ones who truly expanded and built it up. Of course, Jian Wuji would still be the pavilion master if he was alive. Because regardless of whether it was in terms of influence or strength, Jian Wuji was unmatched. As for Yang Yi, to be a little frank, the Sword God's Pavilion had nothing to do with Yang Yi. Meanwhile, Yang Yi suddenly said, Why are all of you so quiet? Oh, I understand. All of you refuse to obey Senior Jian Wuji's last words. Xiao Tian spoke indifferently. Yang Yi, do you think that you can be a good pavilion master? Yang Yi replied, I can't, but all of you can help me. If we join forces, we'll just kill anyone who refuses to accept it. Trust me, it won't take long for us to reign supreme over Sky Continent while I lead Sword God's Pavilion. The other's eyelids twitched. Is he an idiot? Suddenly, Xiao Tianyi said, Yang Yi, you're a smart person, so don't try to act like you're stupid. I'll just be frank. My Sword God's Pavilion doesn't want to become enemies with you, we really don't. After all, you can be considered to be the founding ancestor's successor. But the Sword God's seal and stellar sword diagram are extremely important to my Sword God's Pavilion. So, please return them. My Sword God's Pavilion will be extremely grateful for that. Yang Yi shook his head. It wasn't Sword God's Pavilion that gave me the Sword God's seal and stellar sword diagram, so I won't return it to you. Of course, I have no intention to become enemies with you as well. After all, Sword God's Pavilion was established by Senior Jian Wuji, and I presume he would definitely not want any conflict to arise between us. Yang Yi would absolutely not hand them over. They were of the utmost importance to him. If he lost them, then he wouldn't just be incapable of deterring other 8-star powers, he wouldn't be able to execute the Sword of Rebirth. Could be said that losing them would cause his strength to suffer a huge decline. Some would say he was relying on external sources of strength. Actually, that was true. There was a gap between him and those old Rebirth Realm experts, and he had no choice but to use treasures to make up for it. Meanwhile, one of the old men spoke. What if we insist? As soon as he finished speaking, the atmosphere here became heavy. Yang Yi chuckled and looked the old man in the eyes. Why don't you give it a try? The heavy atmosphere became tense. Even though Yang Yi was just a deity, the Sword God's Pavilion didn't dare to act against him. Yang Yi didn't just possess the stellar sword diagram, he possessed Returnal rank sword intent and the sword domain. Just his sword domain and sword intent made it so that ordinary sword energy and sword formations were useless against him. Moreover, once Yang Yi activated the stellar sword diagram, even Sword God's Pavilion couldn't endure the consequences of that. Meanwhile, Yang Yi suddenly said, I came here with a question for all of you. After I arrived at the large world, a mysterious power has been acting against me. According to my knowledge, the Human Alliance may be their puppet. Since you belong to the Human Alliance, do you know about that power? All the people here exchanged glances. Meanwhile, Xiao Tianyi spoke abruptly. Elders, you may leave. The 5 old men glanced at Xiao Tianyi, and then they vanished on the spot. Once they left, Xiao Tianyi remained silent for a long time before he spoke again. That power is very mysterious. Yang Ye's eyes narrowed slightly. You know about it? Xiao Tianyi nodded. I know a little. Founding Ancestor Wuji made contact with them all those years ago. Senior Jian Wuji made contact with them? A wisp of surprise flashed through Yang Ye's eyes. He hadn't expected that Jian Wuji had actually made contact with that power. Xianxia explained, the Sword God's Pavilion had just been established at that time, and a mysterious expert came with the intent of making us work for them. Founding Ancestor Wuji naturally refused, so he fought that expert. Founding Ancestor Wuji won, of course. However, it didn't end there. That mysterious power sent an even stronger expert, but that expert lost as well. Yang Yi asked, what happened in the end? Xianxia spoke solemnly. Founding Ancestor Wuji vanished for some time, and he returned later on. From that time onward, that mysterious power didn't send another expert to look for trouble with us. He paused for a moment at this point, and then he added, Founding Ancestor Wuji was injured when he got back. He was injured. Yang Yi slowly clenched his fists. He had no doubt that Jian Wuji was extremely strong. Since they could injure Jian Wuji, Yang Yi could imagine how terrifying that power was. Meanwhile, Xianxia added, before founding Ancestor Wuji left, he told us to not offend that power. So long as Sword God's Pavilion doesn't offend them, they won't offend us. That's the agreement founding Ancestor Wuji made with them all those years ago. Xianxia gazed at Yang Yi when he spoke up to this point. Yang Yi, founding Ancestor Wuji, was absolutely strong at that time, and he even had the stellar sword diagram. However, even he could only choose to make a compromise with them. What I'm trying to say is, how many people like him exist in our human race? As for a power that doesn't have such an existence, can they resist that mysterious power? Yang Yi fell silent. Xianxia added, besides that, how strong is the Nether Pavilion? Especially their Sky Maiden, Blood Maiden, and Blind Maiden. How heaven-defying is their strength. However, they were still forced to flee to the lower dimensions. Xianxia paused for a moment and continued, Yang Yi, you can be considered to be the founding ancestor's successor, so let me give you a piece of advice. Leave Sky Continent immediately. Don't get yourself mixed up in the Nether Pavilion's business. Yang Yi remained silent for an instant, and then he said, did you tell them to leave because the forces of that power may have infiltrated Sword God's Pavilion? Xianxia fell silent. I understand. Yang Yi nodded, and then he turned around and left. Once Yang Yi left, Xianxia remained silent for a long time, and then he shook his head. A storm of blood. Yang Yi departed for Sprite Palace once he left Sword God's Pavilion. Even though Xianxia hadn't confirmed it, Yang Yi knew the answer. That power had infiltrated Sword God's Pavilion. Moreover, Xianxia was fully aware of it yet didn't dare to do anything about it. The Nether Pavilion. In the past, he was extremely confident in the Nether Pavilion because he was very well aware how strong Blind Maiden, Blood Maiden, and the others were. Yet now, he started to feel worried for them. That mysterious power was truly strong. Moreover, based on the current situation, that power was completely prepared and waiting for the Nether Pavilion to return to the large world. Once the Nether Pavilion came, chaos would spread through Sky Continent. Because that power's forces were spread throughout the various powers on the continent. Once a battle broke out, it would definitely affect the entire continent. Yang Yi shook his head, restrained his thoughts, and stopped thinking about it. There were many things that made no difference regardless of how much thought one gave it. He didn't have the ability to stop all of it. As far as he was concerned, the most important thing to him was to locate that mysterious power and rescue Zier. As for everything else, he could take it one step at a time. One day later, Yang Yi arrived at Sprite Mist Mountain. Sprite Mist Mountain was the headquarters of the Sprite Palace. Sprite Mist Mountain wasn't on the ground but amidst the clouds and mist in midair. The clouds and mist weren't ordinary, and they were formed by a Sprite Lord instead. It could be said that the Mist Sprite Lord was a natural defensive formation for the Sprite Palace. Moreover, the formation could move. So long as the Sprite Palace willed it, it could be moved at any moment. Sprite Palace could be said to be the most mysterious power that was known throughout the continent. Everyone knew it existed, but few had actually entered it. Besides Sprite Lords and other sprites, Sprite Palace didn't welcome any others. Yang Yi was only asked to come to Sprite Palace because the Sprite Lord was with him. As soon as he arrived below Sprite Mist Mountain, Snowy and little Skyflame emerged from within Xianxia. Both the little fellows looked up at Sprite Mist Mountain, and there was a trace of curiosity in their eyes, while little Skyflame's eyes even carried a trace of excitement. Xianxia rubbed their heads and asked, "Both of you want to head up there?" Little Skyflame hurriedly nodded. As for Snowy, she hesitated for a moment before she nodded. Xianxia smiled. "Then let's go." As soon as he finished speaking, Xianxia took them in his arms and shot up into the sky. When he arrived around 300 m away from the mountain, a huge expanse of mist suddenly appeared around him. The mist descended upon him in waves. However, it didn't harm him and just surrounded him. Xianxia was about to do something about it when Snowy suddenly opened her mouth and breathed in lightly. In an instant, the mist was sucked into her belly. Little Skyflame blinked while admiration filled her eyes. Snowy immediately seemed quite self-satisfied when she noticed the admiration in little Skyflame's eyes. "Eh!" Suddenly, a soft exclaim of surprise came from the top of the mountain, and then the space before Xianxia trembled. After that, a woman in a red dress appeared before them. She was beautiful and had a slender figure, but her entire body was fiery red. Even her hair and eyes were fiery red. A Sprite King. The woman's gaze instantly descended onto Snowy and little Skyflame, and the expression on her face gradually became gentle. Meanwhile, Snowy and little Skyflame were looking at her too. Xianxia noticed that there was no vigilance in their eyes and only curiosity. In the end, the woman gazed at Xianxia. "Let's talk somewhere else?" Xianxia nodded. Just like that, Xianxia followed her to the peak of Sprite Mist Mountain. There were no buildings there. The peak was huge, and Xianxia noticed numerous Sprite Kings there. There were all sorts of Sprite Kings like Mist Sprite Kings, Water Sprite Kings, Lightning Sprite Kings, Wing Sprite Kings, and some that he hadn't even heard of. All of them were coming towards his group. They paid no attention to Xianxia and just gazed at Snowy and little Skyflame. Snowy wasn't able to just join them, but it didn't take long for little Skyflame to become friends with them. In the end, little Skyflame dragged Snowy over. After Snowy joined the group, Xianxia noticed that all the Sprite Kings immediately surrounded Snowy. All of them really liked Snowy and kept trying to make her play with them. Snowy was gradually able to let go and become friends with them. "We didn't know that she was imprisoned by the demon race," the red-clothes woman spoke abruptly. "If we knew, we would have absolutely not stood by idly." Xianxia remained silent. She suddenly added, "Let her stay here, all right?" Xiangxia's face turned cold, and he was about to instinctively refuse. However, he suddenly gazed at Snowy. At this moment, both Snowy and little Skyflame were very happy. They were extremely happy. Suddenly, little Sky appeared by Xiangxia's side. "Let her stay." The woman in a red dress frowned when she saw little Sky. Meanwhile, little Sky waved at her and grinned. "If I'm not wrong, you're the Heavenblaze Emperor Flame's daughter, right?" The woman spoke in a low voice. "You know my mother." Little Sky nodded. "I think I do, but I'm not very sure. In any case, it isn't important." She turned to gaze at Xianxia and continued, "Let Snowy stay here." Xianxia asked, "Why?" Little Sky replied, "It's her responsibility, and it's the best place for her." Xianxia was puzzled. "Responsibility? What responsibility?" Little Sky turned to look at the other Sprite Kings. "She can counter those Sprite Kings, but she can help them as well. If they have her help, they'll be able to grow swiftly, and she'll be able to use the various types of energy they possess to cultivate and speed up her growth. They supplement and restrict each other." Meanwhile, the woman in a red dress said, "Moreover, this is the safest place for her." "The safest?" Xianxia gazed at her. "Why?" She answered, "No power will offend us." Xianxia asked, "Why?" Meanwhile, little Sky pointed at the Sprite Kings in the distance. "Those little fellows are definitely no threat to you if they fight you in single combat. But if they join forces, then even 10 of you will be no match for them. They consist of Sprite Kings of every form of energy in the world. So, if they will it, their joint forces can instantly make all the energy here vanish and transform this place into a place that's completely empty." As for Snowy, If she grows a little more, she can suck away all the spirit energy throughout Sky continent. Little Sky gazed at Yang Yi and continued, everyone will be finished once there's no spirit energy left. Yang Yi was at a loss for words. There's another reason. Meanwhile, Little Sky suddenly added, they are where little Sky and the others' limits lie. Yang Yi was puzzled. Their limits? Little Sky explained, do you know who created Sprite Palace? Yang Yi glanced at her and said, don't tell you did it. Little Sky frowned, and she thought for a while before she said, I think it really was me. Yang Yi felt utterly speechless. Yang Yi and the woman were stunned when they heard Little Sky, and then they exchanged glances. In the end, Yang Yi gazed at Little Sky. That isn't true, right? Little Sky shrugged. I don't know. It isn't important anyway. Yang Yi was at a loss for words. Little Sky gazed at Snowy and spoke softly. You're in the eye of a storm, and it's very dangerous. She too will be in danger if she stays with you. Letting her stay here is for the best. Of course, it's mainly your decision, because only you can make her stay. Yang Yi remained silent for a long time, and then he said, I don't trust Sprite Palace. The woman gazed at Yang Yi. We're not like you humans. So long as someone joins Sprite Palace, we're all like family, and we won't try to fight and kill each other. Meanwhile, Little Sky suddenly added, how about this? I'll guarantee that both she and Little Sky Flame will be safe here. Yang Yi gazed at her. You can't fight, so how will you guarantee that? Little Sky answered. I can tell Little Sky and the others to protect them. Yang Yi replied, can you tell Little Sky and the others to protect me too? Little Sky rolled her eyes at him. You wish. Yang Yi shook his head. Little Sky, try to be a little more impartial. Little Sky replied, you're not like them. They are sprites nurtured by this world, so they are protected by the heavens. But you are a human, and you have too much karma coiled around you. If Little Sky and the others try to protect you, it would definitely make many try to defy the heavens. Yang Yi fell silent. Little Sky continued, I know how you feel about them, and I'm merely giving you a suggestion. You can decide if they stay here or with you. Yang Yi looked up towards the distance. At this moment, Little Sky Flame and Snowy had fully assimilated into the group of Sprite Kings. Snowy seemed extremely happy while being surrounded by the Sprite Kings. As for the Sprite Kings there, they were clearly very fond of Snowy and Little Sky Flame. They revealed no fear towards Snowy. All they revealed was fondness. Besides that, Snowy didn't just absorb their energy as she pleased, and she even frequently created some spirit energy and gave it to those Sprite Kings. At this moment, those Sprite Kings were the happiest. However, once they finished absorbing the spirit energy Snowy gave them, they created various different types of energies and gave them to Snowy. Snowy wasn't taking it by force, and it was they who were willingly giving it to her. A smile curled up on Yang Ye's face as he watched Snowy for a long time. He walked slowly towards Snowy. The other Sprite Kings immediately surrounded Snowy when they saw Yang Yi approaching, and their eyes were filled with vigilance. Meanwhile, Snowy flashed over to Yang Yi, and then she grabbed Yang Ye's hand and went over to those Sprite Kings with him. Snowy was introducing Yang Yi to them, and she was introducing them to Yang Yi as well. After Snowy explained things, the vigilance those Sprite Kings had for Yang Yi gradually vanished. However, they didn't get close to him. They were still quite wary of humans. Or it should be said that besides other sprites and Sprite Kings, they were wary of all other things. Yang Yi rubbed Snowy's head and smiled. Snowy, stay here with Little Sky Flame from now on. All right? Snowy nodded. Suddenly, she seemed to have thought of something, and then she gazed at Yang Yi and pointed at him. Obviously, she was asking, what about you? Yang Yi smiled. I'll come to visit frequently. Suddenly, Snowy transformed into a ray of light that entered the primordial pagoda. Yang Ye's face froze. It didn't take long for his consciousness to enter the pagoda and find Snowy. At this moment, Snowy's claws were clenched tightly together as she stared at him without blinking. Moreover, she seemed to be on the verge of tears, and she looked like Yang Yi didn't want her anymore. Yang Yi embraced Snowy and spoke softly. Silly. I didn't say we're going our separate ways. I meant that you can play with them here, and then come look for me when you want. Understand? Xianxia paused for a moment before he continued. Besides that, did you notice that all of them are so strong? You can play with them and make them obey you, so once someone bullies me in the future, you can tell them to help me fight off my enemies. All right? Snowy blinked and seemed visibly moved by this. Xianxia held Snowy in his arms and spoke seriously. You can play with them, and you can come look for me at any time. So long as you want to, you can stay here or with me. Understand? Snowy gave it some thought, and it didn't take long for her to start waving her claws. She did so extremely quickly. Xianxia, who was an expert in talking with beasts, naturally understood her. Snowy was saying that she wanted to help him, but she didn't want to be separated from him. Xianxia smiled. How about we do this? Besides, when I have matters to attend to, I'll stay here with you. If you miss me, you can come look for me as well. In any case, you can locate me. All right? He didn't want to be separated from her, but he had a stronger desire to keep her safe. Even though his life was very peaceful right now, he was very well aware that a storm was coming. Snowy was really not safe with him. But if Snowy stayed here, these Sprite Kings would protect her, and coupled with Little Sky's guarantee, Snowy would be safe even if something happened to him. He didn't believe the woman in a red dress, he believed Little Sky. Since Little Sky had guaranteed it, then Snowy would definitely be very safe. Besides that, Snowy was really happy here. Even though he knew that she would definitely come with him if he wanted it, he hoped that she would stay. It was too dangerous to stay by his side, and he really didn't have much time to play with her. It didn't take long for Snowy to agree to stay. However, she had a condition. Xianxia had to come back whenever he was free, and she could go see Xianxia whenever she wanted. The woman in a red dress was quite hesitant to agree to that. Obviously, she didn't want Snowy to have anything to do with Xianxia. As far as she was concerned, Xianxia was human. However, it didn't take long for her to have no objections, because if she refused to agree, then Snowy wouldn't hesitate to go with Xianxia. Even though she liked it here, she liked Xianxia more. Besides Snowy and Little Sky Flame, Xianxia left behind all the young flames he'd obtained at Phoenix Domain. They would only be able to grow better in Sprite Palace. Actually, Xianxia had only handed them over because of Snowy. He'd given all of them to Snowy, so once they grew, he had no doubt that they would be Snowy's trusted subordinates. He knew that the Sprite Palace wasn't that complicated, but he still wanted life to be better and safer for Snowy, and he wanted her to possess a better status in Sprite Palace. Xianxia's actions clearly made the Sprite Palace have a good impression of him, so the woman gave Xianxia 5 energy pearls. Moreover, the spirit energy within the energy pearls were even purer than the energy pearls he obtained within the ominous territory. If these 5 were included, he had a total of 12 now. Obviously, it was equivalent to 12 extra lives. It represented his life and the lives of others. Before he left, Xianxia gave Snowy the spirit pearl that contained the spirit energy of a large world. What did Snowy like the most? Spirit energy. That spirit pearl contained the spirit energy of an entire large world. So Snowy just had to work hard, and she would definitely be able to grow swiftly. Snowy clearly liked the spirit pearl very much, and she kept rubbing and kissing it. The expression of the woman in a red dress changed when she saw the spirit pearl that Xianxia gave Snowy. Obviously, she discerned what it was, and she took a deep and long glance at Xianxia before she said, "Thank you. Of course you should thank him." Little Sky spoke softly. "In Snowy's hands, that pearl will be able to make your Sprite Palace's strength rise by at least a level." She gazed at Xianxia at this point and continued, "You actually gave it away. After all, that may be the only spirit pearl in our universe." Xianxia smiled and rubbed Snowy's head. "So long as I have it, and she likes it, then I'm willing to give it to her." When she heard this, Snowy's gaze moved away from the pearl, and then she flew over to Xianxia, wrapped her arms around his head, and rubbed her head against him. Meanwhile, the woman in a red dress spoke abruptly. "If you encounter danger in the future, you can come here. You'll be safe here." Xianxia smiled. Of course. He believed her because there were numerous Sprite Kings here. If they joined forces, they could really change this world. Moreover, Little Sky seemed to really care about this place. She couldn't fight, but if someone attacked these Sprite Kings, she would definitely not stand by idly. There was no need for many. Just around 100 eyes of the Heaven Tao would probably make even that mysterious power shrink back with fear. After all, 100 eyes of the Heaven Tao were no joke. Moreover, Little Sky may be able to summon even more. After that day, Xianxia started living in the Sprite Palace. Besides cultivating, he accompanied Snowy every day. Meanwhile, Snowy had fully overcome her trauma. She was truly happy here, because all the Sprite Kings here would play with her and stay by her side. That was actually very normal. After all, they were her own kind. Xianxia noticed that Snowy grew extremely swiftly while in the presence of these Sprite Kings. Similarly, the Sprite Kings grew extremely quickly while in her presence. Those Sprite Kings weren't the only ones. Even the woman in a red dress frequently spent time with Snowy, and she frequently gave her own fire element energy to Snowy. They supplemented and restrained each other. That was the relationship between the Sprite Lord and Sprite Kings. Of course, it was a comparatively realistic way to describe it, because regardless of whether it was Snowy or those Sprite Kings, they had no intention to use each other. Their way of thinking was actually quite pure. Perhaps it was because they hadn't really come into contact with the outside world. On the third day of his stay in Sprite Palace, Xianxia suddenly got a voice transmission from Ding Xiaoyao. "And Nanjing is in danger. Hurry to the martial tomb. And Nanjing is in danger." Yang Ye's face immediately turned gloomy. Obviously, it was that mysterious power's doing, and he had no doubt that he was their true target. After he received the news about it from Ding Xiaoyao, Xianxia immediately departed for the martial tomb. Even though he was confident in a Nanjing's strength, he had no doubt that a Nanjing would be no match for that mysterious power. The martial tomb. The martial tomb was situated at the border between the devil territory and demon territory. A martial god had once perished there, a true martial god. A martial god from the large world. The martial god. That title was extremely prestigious. It was a title that reigned supreme above all titles, even the sword god and other similar titles. None of them could compete with it in terms of prestige. What was the martial god? The martial god was one who was godly in the martial Tao. The reason the unfettered one had been so strong was because his attainments in the sword Tao were godly. The martial god of Sky Continent was absolutely not someone that the martial gods of Profounder Continent could compare to. Someone capable of being called a god here was definitely a peerless genius. After all, in the last 10,000 years of the continent's history, besides the unfettered one and Jian Wuji who were acknowledged as sword gods, there were no other people who were regarded as gods. It didn't take long for Xianxia to arrive at the martial tomb. The martial tomb was situated on Martial Tomb Mountain. Actually, Martial Tomb Mountain was the martial tomb. Based on its outward appearance, it was like a tomb. Supposedly, it had been specially made like this by the experts who respected and revered the martial god. Martial Tomb Mountain was huge, and Xianxia couldn't see the end of it with a single glance. Many experts visited the martial tomb every year. Some came to pay their respects to the martial god, but even more came to look for treasures. Even if an expert like the martial god had fallen, many treasures would have definitely been left behind. Indeed, many experts had gained quite a bit on Martial Tomb Mountain. The reason an Nanjing had come here was very simple. She wanted to take a look at that so-called martial god. Xianxia snuck into Martial Tomb Mountain. He didn't waste any time and just sped up towards the depths of the mountain. On a hill deep within the mountain, there was a golden stone coffin there. A woman was seated cross-legged near the coffin. She wore a white robe, had her hair tied into a ponytail, and a golden spear floated on her right. She was a Nanjing. There was a tiny golden figure above a Nanjing's head, and it was ceaselessly displaying various techniques. Suddenly, a green-robed man and a white-robed woman walked over slowly from afar. The young man lacked an arm, and he had a short saber hanging from his waist. The woman similarly lacked an arm, and she had a sword hanging from her waist. It didn't take long for them to stop. The man looked up at a Nanjing for a long time, and then he said, "So actually gained the favor of the martial god." The woman nodded slightly, It's unexpected indeed. Even an idiot could discern that a Nanjing was receiving the martial god's inheritance right now. They knew that the martial god's inheritance was here, but they hadn't expected that the martial god would actually give it to her. After all, countless extraordinary geniuses had been here since the martial god's death, but none had obtained the martial god's favor. The martial god had chosen to wait for a suitable successor than to give his inheritance to just anyone. Since the Nanjing had been able to obtain the martial god's acknowledgement, it was obvious how outstanding she was. They remained silent for a long time before the man suddenly said, "Go on. Don't kill her. Master needs her alive." Right when they were about to act, a middle-aged man in a golden robe suddenly appeared out of thin air in front of them. There was a tiny character of the middle-aged man's forehead. The middle-aged man sized up the man and woman, and then he spoke solemnly, "The sword, nucleus, and saber soul." The young man sized up the middle-aged man and said, "Master was right, even if an expert like you has fallen, so long as you will it, your soul and consciousness can exist forever in the world. However, allow me to be honest, what's the point in refusing to enter the cycle of reincarnation or taking the body of another and just living like a ghost?" The martial god nodded slightly. "It's pointless. However, I have unfinished business, so I had no choice but to continue existing in the world in this form. Fortunately, my final wish will be completed soon." The young man glanced at a Nanjing and then he said, "You may not be able to complete it." The middle-aged man placed his right hand behind his back and gazed at them. "Will both of you fight me together?" The young man shook his head slightly. "Just I am enough." The middle-aged man fell silent for an instant, and then he suddenly smiled. "In the past, no one dared to say that to me. Of course, it's different now. Come, let me see how strong someone who possessed the saber soul is." The young man didn't speak. He just suddenly grabbed the saber on his waist and drew it. Hiss! The space in front of the young man was instantly torn open like a sharp blade had sliced through paper, and it was so swift that it instantly tore all the way to the middle-aged man. Meanwhile, the middle-aged man suddenly tapped his finger forward, and the space before him shook violently. There was a thread of saber energy which was as thin as a cicada's wing on the tip of the middle-aged man's finger, and it seemed like it was frozen in place. A moment of silence ensued, and then the middle-aged man flicked it. Bang! The saber energy shattered. Meanwhile, a ray of cold light flashed, and then a saber had struck against the middle-aged man's finger. At the same time that it struck his finger, the middle-aged man twisted his finger slightly, and then two of his fingers clamped down on the saber's blade. Suddenly, the young man released his grasp on his saber, and then he used his palm as a blade to slash the middle-aged man. Meanwhile, the middle-aged man's fingers moved along the blade of the saber and sliced down towards the young man's palm at an angle. If it were to hit the young man, then the young man's entire hand might vanish. The young man knew the risks, so his palm, which was slashing down towards the middle-aged man, had twisted like a snake in midair, and he grabbed the saber's blade. Suddenly, the middle-aged man released the saber, and he clenched his fist instead. After that, he tapped his right foot down, and his figure shot forward while he swung a punch forward as well. Bang! An explosion resounded, and the young man was blasted around 300 m away. The young man looked up at the middle-aged man. As expected of the martial god, there are no flaws in your moves. Unfortunately, your body is just a spirit body, and every attack you execute will exhaust a portion of your energy. Otherwise, perhaps only Master would be able to fight you. As soon as he finished speaking, the young man suddenly vanished on the spot, and he was in front of the middle-aged man when he appeared once more. This time, his saber was at least a few times faster than before, and even a rebirth realm expert would probably find it difficult to discern the trajectory of his attack. However, the middle-aged man was always able to stop the young man's saber with extreme precision and counterattack. The battle grew more and more intense, and the young man grew faster and faster. He was like a storm. As for the middle-aged man, he was always firm like a mountain, but his body was slowly becoming translucent. The young man was fighting a battle of attrition, and he intended to exhaust the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man was clearly aware of that, and he wanted to annihilate the young man quickly. But he'd failed. Time trickled by, and the middle-aged man's body grew more and more ethereal. Suddenly, Nanjing opened her eyes, and then a spear tore through the air towards the young man. However, a sword stopped it when it arrived around 30 m away from the young man. Nanjing stood up slowly and waved her right hand. Sky Split instantly flew back into her grasp. She was about to attack when the middle-aged man suddenly appeared in front of her. "You're no match for them. Leave." And Nanjing shook her head. The middle-aged man said, "Their strength surpasses yours too much. You are far from a match for them. Hurry up and leave. Don't let my soul vanish for nothing." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly turned to look at the young man and woman. A moment later, he vanished on the spot, and he was in front of them when he appeared once more. After that, his figure shook, and then countless afterimages instantly appeared here. The man and woman immediately swung their weapons. In an instant, countless strands of saber energy and sword energy crisscrossed through the area, and it caused the entire mountain to start cracking apart. Bang! 3 breaths of time later, the entire mountain started to collapse. At the moment Martial God Mountain started to collapse, and Nanjing had left the place. She didn't stay because staying would be no different than giving her life away. Not only were their cultivations much higher than hers, even their attainments in the saber and sword were greater than hers. Actually, it could be said that besides the martial god, they were the strongest experts she'd even seen. However, right when she left Martial God Mountain, the man and woman appeared in front of her again. And Nanjing's face fell, but there was no fear on her face. The young man said, "Our master requests your presence." And Nanjing's eyes narrowed slightly. She was about to attack when a voice suddenly resounded, "Can you take me as well?" And Nanjing was slightly stunned. And then she saw a ray of light descend here from afar. The light dispersed to reveal Xianxia's figure. And Nanjing spoke softly, "You're here." Xianxia nodded. "Are you all right?" She shook her head slightly. "I'm fine." Xianxia nodded, and then he gazed at them and said, "Can you take me as well?" The young man shook his head slightly. "Master didn't say anything about requesting your presence." Xianxia shrugged. "If that's the case, she can't go with you." The young man turned to look at the woman by his side. The woman stepped forward slowly, and then she gazed at Xianxia. "You know the Sword of Rebirth?" Xianxia's eyes narrowed slightly. "How do you know that?" she asked. "Do you know who created it?" Xianxia replied, "A sword cultivator." She looked him in the eyes and said, "I'm that sword cultivator." Xianxia's face froze. Was the Sword of Rebirth strong? As far as Xianxia was concerned, it was extremely strong, and he really admired the sword cultivator who'd created it. However, he hadn't expected that person to be standing in front of him. Xianxia fell silent for a moment and asked, "Aren't you dead?" She replied, "The old me is dead. Now my life belongs to Master." Her master? Xianxia slowly clenched his fists. Who is that person to actually be able to make her acknowledge him or her as her master? Meanwhile, the woman said, "I left that technique in a secret chamber with the hopes that someone would have the luck to obtain it. I didn't expect it to fall into your hands." "A secret chamber?" Xianxia frowned. It didn't take long for Xianxia to gain a rough understanding of the situation. She wasn't that old man's friend, and the old man had probably obtained the sword technique by chance. She continued, "I fought both the Unfettered One and Jian Wuji. Come, draw your sword and let me see what level your attainments in the sword Dao are at." Xianxia fell silent for a short while and said, "All right, I wanted to fight a strong sword cultivator as well. I'll finally be able to get my wish today." As soon as he finished speaking, Xianxia vanished on the spot, and he was in front of her when his figure appeared once more. A moment later, he drew his sword and swung it swiftly. 5 overlapped heaven rends. The space in front of Xianxia instantly cracked apart. The woman's expression remained calm and indifferent. When his attack arrived around 10 centimeters away from her, she just launched an upward stab with her sword. Bang! A wave of energy erupted from the point of collision. But it didn't take long for the wave of energy to be obliterated by Yang Ye's sword intent. At this moment, her sword was pushing against Yang Ye's sword, so his sword couldn't descend even an inch further. Meanwhile, the woman suddenly shook her hand, and then the sword precursor in Yang Ye's grasp instantly started trembling violently. In an instant, Yang Yi was blasted over 300 m away. At the same time, she vanished on the spot, and she was in front of Yang Yi when her figure appeared once more. After that, she stabbed her sword forward. Yang Ye's eyes narrowed slightly, and he launched a forward stab as well. However, his sword wasn't moving to stop her attack, and it was stabbing towards her chest. The woman frowned slightly, and then she twisted her wrist. Her sword's trajectory curved and struck the body of Yang Ye's sword, causing Yang Ye's sword to be instantly pushed away. Meanwhile, her sword moved forward along his sword and swept towards his chest. However, Yang Yi still didn't try to stop it and similarly executed an angled slash at her. Right when their swords were about to strike each other, the woman suddenly withdrew her sword and swiftly retreated around 30 m away. After that, she waved her hand lightly. In an instant, her sword appeared above Yang Yi, and then a sword lotus appeared in the air above Yang Yi. Bang! The sword lotus instantly exploded apart, and then countless strands of sword energy rained down and enveloped Yang Yi. A moment of silence ensued, and then an explosion resounded. Countless strands of sword energy shot up into the sky, but the sword energy from the lotus didn't vanish. Conversely, they started lining up in an extremely orderly manner, and then they descended towards Yang Yi again. Yang Yi was ceaselessly swinging the sword precursor, and numerous strands of sword energy surged incessantly and collided with the sword energy above Yang Yi. Sword energy was crisscrossing and colliding incessantly, causing space to be riddled with holes. It was an extremely shocking sight. A long time passed before all the sword energy vanished. At this moment, Yang Yi was completely covered in blood. His body was covered in injuries from sword energy, and every single one was ceaselessly bleeding. Meanwhile, the woman spoke abruptly. "I once killed a rebirth realm expert in an instant with that technique." Yang Yi nodded. "It's very strong indeed. I almost failed to stop it. Dual cultivating in the sword and body." She spoke solemnly. "Needless to say, you're really strong, regardless of whether it's your body or your attainments in the sword Dao. Unfortunately, you're too young. Your cultivation is too low, and both your attainments in the sword Dao and sword intent haven't been consolidated. Of course, it's normal. After all, you're still so young. If you're given enough time, unfortunately, you may not have that time." As soon as she finished speaking, she swung her sword at Yang Yi from afar. A crescent-shaped sword energy tore through the air. Once the crescent of sword energy arrived around 3 m away from Yang Yi, it suddenly shook violently, and then it actually transformed into 10 crescents of sword energy. The 10 crescents of sword energy started spinning as they shot towards Yang Yi from various different angles. Even though they were striking Yang Yi from various different angles, they were striking in succession. If one allowed them to come together, one would notice that they actually formed a lotus flower. The attack was simply impossible to dodge, so Yang Yi could only go head-on against it. Suddenly, a strand of terrifying sword intent and slaughter intent surged out from Yang Yi, and then he drew his sword and swung it. Bang! A loud explosion resounded, and then countless strands of sword energy started shooting madly towards the surroundings. Every single one of them tore space apart. In the blink of an eye, space was riddled with holes. A long time passed before everything returned to normal. At this moment, Yang Yi was covered in blood again. The sword energy was able to pierce through his physical defenses. The woman turned to look at the man by her side. "Let's go!" The man nodded slightly, and then he was about to capture a Nanjing. However, Yang Yi suddenly said, "It's not over yet." She gazed at him. "I know that you possess the sword domain, but did you see me using sword intent?" Yang Ye's pupils constricted. At this moment, he realized that up until this point in the battle, the woman hadn't utilized sword intent at all. The sword domain could suppress sword intent, but she didn't use sword intent at all. So, how could he suppress her? She looked him in the eyes. Master said it's not time for you to die. So you don't have to die right now. Suddenly, Yang Yi vanished on the spot, and he was in front of her when he appeared once more. A moment later, he suddenly drew his sword and swung it. The woman frowned slightly while a wisp of the intent to kill flashed through her eyes. At the same time, she swung her sword. This time, Yang Yi didn't dodge, and he once again fought without any regard for his life. The woman's strength surpassed his own, but her body definitely wasn't stronger than his. His sword could kill her with a single strike, but she probably wasn't capable of piercing through his defenses and killing him with just one attack. Clang! The woman pushed Yang Yi back and created distance between them. She naturally refused to fight Yang Yi at close quarters. Yang Yi wasn't just a sword cultivator, he was a body cultivator too. After creating space between them, she created more sword energy, and they shot forward in succession and drowned Yang Yi beneath them. Bang! 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 Numerous explosions resounded. The space here instantly started trembling incessantly, and it seemed like it was on the verge of collapse. It was an extremely shocking sight. It didn't take long for the sword energy to disperse and Yang Yi to appear before everyone again. At this moment, he seemed completely fine because there was a casket lid in front of him. The casket lid. Yang Yi had suddenly realized that he had no reason to purely fight her with the sword. Fairness? If she suppressed her cultivation to the deity realm and fought him, then he would be willing to fight her with just the sword. However, she was a peak rebirth realm expert. But he was just a deity. If he were to compete solely with the sword against her, then wouldn't he be courting death? So, Yang Yi had decisively utilized the casket lid. The sword energy was completely stopped by the casket lid. Even though the aftershock still struck him, it was no different than a scratch to him. The woman gazed at the casket lid for some time, and then she said, "What an amazing treasure!" Yang Yi didn't waste his breath. His figure vanished on the spot, and he was in front of the woman when he appeared once more. After that, he launched a forward stab just like he'd done previously. His current objective was very simple, and it was to fight her in close quarters. He wanted her to engage in a struggle of life and death with him. His body was stronger than hers, so he couldn't afford to do that. However, she couldn't afford to do that. So long as she created space between them, he would use the casket lid. Because he had no need to fear her ranged attacks while he had the casket lid. The situation had instantly taken a complete 180-degree turn once Yang Yi used the casket lid. Of course, he wasn't able to gain the upper hand. After all, the gap in their strengths was still present. However, the woman wasn't able to gain the upper hand either. Just like that, they fell into a stalemate, and Nanjing and the young man who were watching the battle had quite unsightly expressions on their faces. And Nanjing was worried because Yang Yi would definitely be unable to hold on if the battle continued like this. How could a deity win in a battle of attrition against a rebirth realm expert? Moreover, the young man with a saber was standing at the side. Bang! Suddenly, an explosion resounded, and then Yang Yi was blasted around 3 kilometers away. Yang Ye's pupils constricted slightly because the woman's attack was at least 5 times stronger than it had been. If he hadn't raised the casket lid in time, he may have been killed by that attack. Moreover, there was a 10-centimeter deep mark on the casket lid. The casket lid, which had always remained unharmed, had been cut open. Even though it hadn't gone through the casket lid, it was sufficient to prove how terrifying her attack had been. At this moment, the woman had quite an unsightly expression on her face. She thought that dealing with Yang Yi would be an extremely easy task for her. After all, Yang Yi was only a deity. However, after fighting him for a while, she'd realized that Yang Yi was much stronger than she'd imagined, especially when he had so many treasures. "Don't waste time." Suddenly, the young man spoke. "Master will be unhappy if we're late. Finish him swiftly. I'll capture her." As he spoke, he turned and charged towards Nanjing. The woman looked Yang Yi in the eye and said, "It's over." As soon as she finished speaking, her sword suddenly shook violently. As it shook violently, the space around her actually started trembling violently as well. Yang Ye's eyelids twitched. What the hell is she doing? Suddenly, A voice resounded. Aren't you ashamed of bullying two juniors like that? You're really going from bad to worse. Yang Yi was stunned when he heard this voice, and then he was overjoyed. Yang Yi was overjoyed because he knew the owner of the voice well. It was Blood Maiden. However, she didn't show herself because her voice had been transmitted through space. In other words, she was on the way here. The man and woman exchanged glances, and it didn't take long for their gazes to descend onto a Nanjing. Right when they were about to act, a man in black clothes suddenly appeared in front of them. The man seemed to be around the age of 30, and there was an extremely long spear on his back. There was a golden dragon inscribed around the spear. The golden dragon's tail was situated at the tip of the spear while its head extended just to the end of its shaft. Yang Yi had an extremely solemn expression on his face when he saw the man, because the man's strength felt unfathomable to him. He felt that the man in black clothes may be even stronger than the man with a saber and the woman with a sword. Master has ordered your return because the Nether Pavilion has shown itself. As soon as the black-clothed man finished speaking, he turned to look at Yang Yi. If you want to save the spatial mink, then come to Coiling Dragon Mountain in 10 days. Don't be late. As soon as he finished speaking, he vanished on the spot. At the same time, the young man and woman immediately vanished on the spot as well. And Nanjing suddenly said, "They are so strong." Yang Yi nodded. Very strong. Both the Nanjing and Yang Yi were no match for them in a one-on-one battle. Even though he fought such an intense battle with the woman earlier, the woman's strength was actually far superior to him. Moreover, she clearly hadn't been fighting seriously. On the other hand, while he did have the stellar sword diagram and sword god seal, he wasn't confident in his ability to kill her with them. Yang Ye's face gradually turned solemn. Who exactly is that mysterious master of theirs? That person was actually able to make so many experts submit. Suddenly, the space in front of Yang Yi and a Nanjing trembled, and then a ray of blood-red light flashed. The blood-red light dispersed, and Blood Maiden appeared before them. Yang Yi glanced at her and asked, "Where are Nether Maiden and the others?" Blood Maiden gazed at him. "Are you very disappointed that it's me and not 10th sister?" Yang Ye's face froze, and then he hurriedly said, "Not at all. When he noticed the smile on the corners of her mouth, he realized that she was joking. Yang Yi laughed bitterly. "Second sister, even you're being mischievous now." Blood Maiden restrained her smile. "Sorry." Yang Yi was stunned. "Why?" Blood Maiden turned to look towards the distance. "If it wasn't for us, she wouldn't have targeted you. Because of us, she has started to scheme against you and capture your friends." Meanwhile, Yang Yi suddenly interrupted Blood Maiden. "Second sister, why are you even saying something like that? I think that it's pointless to speak about things like that between us. If you're really worried that I'll be killed, then give me a few more treasures. Treasures that surpass the known ranks of quality. I will absolutely not refuse them." Blood Maiden shook her head slightly. "You wish. Even I don't have such treasures. Actually, even I feel like robbing you because you have so many." Yang Yi was at a loss for words. Meanwhile, Blood Maiden gazed at a Nanjing. "You obtained the martial god's inheritance?" And Nanjing nodded slightly. "Amazing." Blood Maiden spoke softly. "This martial god isn't like those martial gods from the lower dimensions. Strictly speaking, those martial gods can't be considered to be true martial gods. However, this martial god is one that the entire continent publicly acknowledged all those years ago. His reputation on the continent was actually not inferior to the unfettered one. He's extremely picky. Countless geniuses have come here throughout the years with the hopes of obtaining his inheritance. But he didn't take a liking to any one of them." Yang Yi smiled. "If even a Nanjing wasn't enough for him, then I can only say that he would have to wait until he vanished completely from this world." Blood Maiden sized up a Nanjing and nodded. "She's an extraordinary genius indeed. Her natural talent isn't inferior to yours at all. No, it's better than yours. If you didn't obtain so many fortuitous encounters, you would definitely be inferior to her." Yang Yi rolled his eyes at her. However, Blood Maiden was right. If he didn't have the primordial pagoda, he would definitely be inferior to her. But every single person had their own fortune. Just like in Nanjing, she too had obtained numerous inheritances and fortuitous encounters all along the way. Of course, her natural talent was beyond doubt. Meanwhile, Xianxia asked, "Where are the others?" The others he spoke of were naturally Nether Maiden and the others. Blood Maiden replied, "They haven't come up here yet. You came on your own?" Xianxia was astounded. "Aren't you afraid?" She glanced at him. "You would have died if I didn't." Xianxia's heart felt warm. Blood Maiden and the others had definitely obtained news of the fact that he was being targeted, and that was why she'd rushed up here. Xianxia spoke softly. "It's very dangerous for you to have come here on your own?" Blood Maiden was very strong, but those three fellows were very strong as well. Blood Maiden would definitely have no need to fear them if it was a one-on-one battle. However, they would definitely not fight her in single combat. Even he wouldn't choose to fight her in single combat. Blood Maiden replied, "I'll be fine for now, because they want to annihilate all of us and not just me. So, she won't attack until all of us are here. After all, if we choose to just flee, then even 10 experts who are stronger than me wouldn't be able to stop us from fleeing." Xianxia said, "What is that power that's targeting you? Who's that person they call Master?" Blood Maiden remained silent for a long time, and then she said, "You'll know in the future. Actually, it won't take long. You'll know in 10 days. Xianxia asked, "All of you'll be coming with me?" Blood Maiden replied, "The true reason they asked you to go there in 10 days is to make us go there at the same time. 10 days should be enough." Xianxia asked, "Have you found your eldest sister?" Blood Maiden shook her head slightly. "We haven't found her." Then, Xianxia spoke softly, "Can you win?" Blood Maiden spoke indifferently. "We have to fight even if we can't win. We can't just watch as you give your life away." Xianxia was absolutely moved by this. Meanwhile, Blood Maiden added, "You're too weak. I intend to take you somewhere. That place should be quite helpful to you." Xianxia asked, "Where?" She fell silent for an instant, and then she said, "The Nether Pavilion. The Nether Pavilion." Xianxia's heart shook. "Their old headquarters?" Blood Maiden asked, "Is someone helping you investigate that power?" Xianxia nodded. "A friend of mine." Blood Maiden frowned. "Where is that person right now?" Xianxia was puzzled. "Why? That person is in danger. You lead the way." As soon as she finished speaking, she grabbed Xianxia and Nanjing's shoulders before vanishing on the spot. Oblivion Boundary City. A woman who held a folding fan suddenly appeared at the entrance of the city. As soon as she appeared there, she instantly became the center of attention, and the gazes of countless converged on her. She was beautiful. She was so beautiful she could take one's soul away. She paid no attention to the gazes from the surroundings. She went straight to the goat pub. She suddenly stopped when she was about to enter because there were numerous people behind her. Practically all of them were men, and there were over 1,000 of them. She turned around and glanced at them. After that, she waved her fan gently, and a light gust of wind blew by. The figures of those people suddenly stiffened on the spot, and then they actually aged in an instant. It didn't take long for them to become withered and transform into dirt that was blown off with the wind. At this moment, their entire aging process had been completed in less than half a breath of time. The woman turned around and walked into the goat pub. Meanwhile, a woman in a green dress came to the woman holding a folding fan, and she said, "My young miss requests your presence." The woman with a fan nodded slightly, and then she vanished on the spot. In a room, Ding Xiaoyao gazed at the woman before her and said, "Since the moment I started helping him, I knew that this day would come." The woman sized up Ding Xiaoyao. In the end, her gaze lingered on the center of Ding Xiaoyao's forehead for a long time. She remained silent for quite some time before she said, "Wisdom, no wonder. Wisdom." Ding Xiaoyao frowned slightly. "What are you trying to say?" The woman explained, "There are many strange and miraculous physiques in the world. You possess the wisdom physique, so you're born with extraordinary wisdom." She paused for a moment and continued, "I possess the wisdom physique too." Ding Xiaoyao fell silent. She hadn't expected herself to possess that wisdom physique the woman spoke about. Meanwhile, the woman with a folding fan chuckled abruptly. We who possess the wisdom physique plan and anticipate all sorts of things, so the world doesn't like our presence. Thus, only a single possessor of the wisdom physique appears in each era. If two appear, then it proves that one will die, just like sprite lords. Ding Xiaoyao gazed at the woman for a long time. Your target is the Nether Pavilion. Will you spare Yang Ye's life? The woman replied with a question. Would Yang Yi spare my life if I annihilate the Nether Pavilion? Ding Xiaoyao fell silent. The woman with a fan suddenly said, There's something I'm really curious about. You knew this would happen, so why did you help him? Ding Xiaoyao asked, Have you ever liked someone? The woman fell silent. Quite some time passed before she nodded. I understand now. Come with me. If I have you with me, then I presume he'll definitely stop at nothing too. Meanwhile, Ding Xiaoyao suddenly withdrew a herb which looked like a flower, and she placed it on the table. Xiaoyao herbaceous peony, also known as the herb of parting. Give it to him for me and tell him that I don't ask for much. It's enough if he thinks of me from time to time. As soon as she finished speaking, Ding Xiaoyao's eyes closed slowly, and a strand of blood gradually seeped out from the corner of her mouth. A ray of blood-red light flashed through the sky above Oblivion Boundary City, and it didn't take long for Yang Ye's group to arrive within the city. However, Yang Ye's face became gloomy when he arrived at the goat pub, because it was empty. No, there was one last person, and it was a woman in a green dress. Yang Yi knew the woman. Her name was Xiao Lu, and she was one of Ding Xiaoyao's trusted subordinates. Yang Yi asked in a low voice, Where's your young miss? Xiao Lu spoke softly, You're too late. Yang Ye's hands trembled. What are you trying to say? She looked him in the eyes and said, You know, my young miss expected this to happen when she started to help you investigate that power. That power is much more terrifying than we ever imagined. As for us, the resources available to us were too inferior, so no matter how careful we were, it's impossible for us to escape their notice. We advised her to stop because we couldn't continue doing this. But she refused to listen. Yang Yi closed his eyes. Where is she? Xiao Lu remained silent for a long time, and then she said, She knew they would come for her, so when they did, she took her own life. She didn't want to be captured and used as a pawn to threaten you. Silence filled the surroundings. 2 streams of clear liquid had suddenly started seeping out of the corners of Yang Ye's eyes. A long time passed before he said, It was me that caused her death. It was me. I should have expected that they would come for her. I should have thought of it. As soon as he finished speaking, Yang Yi turned around and walked towards the door. However, he was stopped by Blood Maiden and a Nanjing. Blood Maiden said, Don't be rash. You won't be able to take revenge, and you'll only be giving your life away. And Nanjing spoke as well. If you die, wouldn't she have died for nothing? Meanwhile, Xiao Lu suddenly said, My young miss said that if you want to avenge her, then don't act rashly. There'll only be hope while you're still alive. Yang Yi clenched his fists and remained silent for a long time. He turned around and walked away. Let me calm down. Blood Maiden and a Nanjing didn't stop him. At this moment, Yang Yi really needed to calm down. Blood Maiden glanced at a Nanjing. The latter nodded slightly and followed Yang Yi out. After a Nanjing and Yang Yi left, Blood Maiden gazed at Xiao Lu. Where's your young Mrs. Corpse? Xiao Lu shook her head. I don't know. Blood Maiden frowned slightly. You don't know? Xiao Lu nodded. She was in the room when she met with that mysterious woman. But when I went in later, both of them had vanished. Besides that, every single member of ours that participated in the investigation of that mysterious power were killed. Blood Maiden gazed at Xiao Lu. Then why are you still alive? Xiao Lu gazed at Blood Maiden. She wanted me to give you a message. Blood Maiden asked. What message? Xiao Lu said. She said that she has prepared your graves. Now all those graves lack are your bodies. Blood Maiden nodded slightly. I'll allow her to understand what it's like to dig your own grave. As soon as she finished speaking, Blood Maiden turned around and left. At the entrance of the goat pub, Xianxia sat on the ground while lying against the wall beside the door. His gaze was aimed at the sky, and it was completely lifeless and seemed to be slightly lost. Meanwhile, Nanjing sat silently by his side. Console him? She didn't know how to do that. However, she felt that nothing she could say would make a difference. Just being by his side was enough. A long time passed before Xianxia spoke softly. I never expected her to do that. He knew Ding Xiaoyao from Profounder Continent, and there had been quite a bit of conflict between them at that time. Even though they made up in the end and had a good impression of each other, it was far from being love. But he hadn't expected her to actually do that for him. And Nanjing spoke softly. Would you feel regret if you died for her sake? Xianxia shook his head slightly. And Nanjing didn't say another word, and Xianxia understood what she meant. Around 15 minutes later, Xianxia stood up and took in Nanjing's hand. Let's head to the Nether Pavilion together. Strength. At this moment, Xianxia desperately desired to improve his strength. Only with sufficient strength could he save Zier, and only then could he take revenge. Presently, he wasn't able to fight back against that mysterious power. The important matter at hand for him was to improve his strength and not waste time here. No matter how great the pain and sadness in his heart were, he had to keep them at bay right now. Xianxia's group of 3 left Oblivion Boundary City. 2 hours later, Blood Maiden brought them to a desolate area. Extremely desolate. That was what Xianxia thought right now. They continued forward, and it didn't take long for ruins to appear within their vision. Based on the appearance of the ruins, they could imagine that grand buildings definitely used to exist in this desolate area. A short while later, a damaged palace appeared before them. Xianxia's gaze descended onto the center of the palace. There were 3 characters there. Obviously, it was the Nether Pavilion's headquarters. Blood Maiden remained silent as she gazed at that palace. There were slight ripples of emotions in her eyes. She seemed to be recalling the past. Quite some time passed before her gaze became calm once more. Head in. Once they entered the palace, the surroundings instantly dimmed down and felt quite oppressive. It was very oppressive inside the palace. Xianxia suddenly asked, Second sister, can you tell me about the Nether Pavilion? He was curious about the Nether Pavilion. It was an extremely mysterious power, and it was so mysterious that even the people of the large world knew very little about it. Blood Maiden remained silent for an instant, and then she said, The Nether Pavilion was created by someone from outside this universe. The Nether Pavilion doesn't just have the 10 Nether Halls, it has a Nether Judge, the 3 Nether Bureaus, the Nether Earthly Buddha, the 2 Nether Envoys, the 3 Nether Saints, the 5 Nether Phantoms, and so on and so forth. Besides that, there's the Nether Cavalry beneath them. She paused for a moment and continued. Amongst these, the Nether Judges are comparatively stronger and the most mysterious. Even we have never met them. The next in line is the Nether Earthly Buddhas, and then the 3 Nether Saints. After that, it's the 5 Nether Phantoms. We, the 10 Nether Halls, are ranked right at the bottom. Shock. Xianxia and Nanjing were completely shocked when they heard her. They hadn't expected the 10 halls of the Nether Pavilion to just be a part of the Nether Pavilion. Moreover, it was the comparatively weaker part of the Nether Pavilion. What a joke! How terrifying were Blood Maiden and the others. But the 10 halls of the Nether Pavilion were actually just the comparatively weaker part of the entire Nether Pavilion. Meanwhile, Blood Maiden continued, Our headquarters isn't on Sky Continent. We, the 10 Nether Halls, merely came to Sky Continent because of a mission. But not long after we arrived here, our Hall Master vanished abruptly. The Nether Pavilion instantly started falling into chaos once the Hall Master vanished. Everyone was fighting for the position of Hall Master. Our eldest sister had no intention to fight for that position, so we stayed here and didn't return. However, her face became icy cold when she spoke up to this point, but we still weren't able to avoid it. It didn't take long for the Nether Earthly Buddha to arrive at Sky Continent to look for us. He wanted us to follow him and help him seize the position of Hall Master. Eldest sister naturally refused, but he actually captured Boundary Maiden and Oblivion Maiden in order to threaten us. In the end, we secretly received help from the Nether Earthly Buddha's competition and saved both of them, and we killed the Nether Earthly Buddha. Xianxia asked, "Is the nether earthly Buddha very strong?" Blood Maiden nodded. "Very strong. Besides the other members of the nether pavilion, there may only be 3 others, whom I've met, that are able to defeat him in a one-on-one battle." Xianxia was curious. "Which 3? She replied, "The unfettered one at the rebirth realm. The unfettered one can defeat him with a cultivation at the rebirth realm, but the unfettered one wouldn't be able to kill him. The second is that mysterious person of this world who was born along with all things. That person can kill him, but it wouldn't be that easy. Moreover, that person will have to rely on the energy of all things. The last one is that old man in a Taoist's robe that killed Jian Wuji. That old man is so strong that his strength surpasses my knowledge. Not to mention a nether earthly Buddha. I'm afraid even the hall master at peak strength wouldn't be able to fight him. The old man in a Taoist's robe." Xianxia's heart shook. Who was the old man? Perhaps only Xiaoqi, who was in deep sleep, knew the answer to that question. The old man's strength was really quite abnormal. Actually, it wasn't just quite abnormal, it was absolutely abnormal. After all, just a clone of his had been able to kill Jian Wuji, who'd activated the stellar sword diagram. Just a clone. If just his clone was so strong, then how strong was his main body? Meanwhile, Blood Maiden continued, "Even though we killed the nether earthly Buddha, that wasn't the end of it. The one who's pulling the strings from the shadows and acting against us is from the nether pavilion as well." Xianxia's expression changed. "She's from the nether pavilion as well?" Blood Maiden nodded slightly. "She's one of the 2 nether envoys, the scholarly envoy. She possesses the greatest authority in the nether pavilion, and she manages all the affairs in the pavilion. She was the one who gave us the mission to come to Sky continent." Xianxia asked, "Why is she trying to kill all of you?" Blood Maiden replied, "Because the nether earthly Buddha was her older brother. Her older brother by blood. They were extremely close." Xianxia nodded. "So that's why." Blood Maiden said, "That's roughly what happened. Strictly speaking, it can be considered to be an internal conflict of our nether pavilion. I'm sorry that you were implicated in all of this." Xianxia shook his head. "I have one last question. What's the mission you were sent to complete in Sky continent?" Blood Maiden fell silent for an instant, and then she replied, "Capture this universe's Lord of the Heaven Tao alive." Xianxia was slightly stunned. He was about to speak when a ray of white light suddenly flashed, and then Little Sky appeared in front of Blood Maiden. "Humph! Humph!" Little Sky gazed at Blood Maiden and laughed coldly. A solemn expression appeared in Blood Maiden's eyes when she saw Little Sky. The little girl before her was very mysterious. Xianxia pulled on Little Sky's arm and said, "What are you laughing coldly about? She didn't say that she intends to capture you alive. Or are you the Lord of the Heaven Tao?" Little Sky spoke indifferently. "It's nothing. I just wanted to laugh." As soon as she finished speaking, she just entered the primordial pagoda. Xianxia was at a loss for words. Meanwhile, Blood Maiden suddenly said, "Let's go." Xianxia nodded. He didn't want to continue wasting time here. The 3 of them went deep into the palace, and it didn't take long for them to arrive at a dead end. Xianxia and Nanjing gazed at Blood Maiden. Blood Maiden waved her hand lightly. In an instant, the wall before her started moving, and it moved slowly towards opposite directions. It didn't take long for a door to appear before them. Blood Maiden said, "Let's go." Once they entered through the door, Xianxia felt the surroundings suddenly become blurry. At the same time, his head started feeling heavy. A long time passed before Xianxia felt that he was back to normal. Xianxia opened his eyes. At this moment, they weren't in the hall anymore. An empty area stretched out around them, and there was nothing here. Xianxia gazed at Blood Maiden. "What's this?" Blood Maiden spoke softly. "There are many types of energy in this world of ours. For example, profound energy, energy of the 5 elements, stellar energy, the energy of time, the energy of yin and yang. Eldest sister created this place all those years ago. This place is isolated from all energy. Or it should be said that only the energy of yin and yang exists here. She extracted every other type of energy." As soon as she finished speaking, she gazed at Xianxia. comprehend. You're a deity now. The only way to advance further is to comprehend the energy of yin and yang. Only by understanding the energy of yin and yang will you be able to step into the dualism realm. If it's in the outside world, it would be very difficult to accomplish that. However, it's much simpler here. As for how long it'll take, it depends on your own fortune. Yang Yi nodded. Understood. Attaining the dualism realm required comprehension, just like his sword intent. If one succeeded at comprehending it, then one's sword intent would immediately rise to a new height. It sounded quite profound, and it wasn't easy to succeed at. Normally, it required months of constant effort to finally succeed. Everything was very difficult in the beginning, but as one constantly completed the task 1,000 or 10,000 times, one would notice that the task wasn't that difficult. The reason it didn't feel very difficult anymore was because one would have grasped some techniques to complete the task. Once one grasped a part of the key to something, one would notice that it was actually very easy. Meanwhile, Blood Maiden gazed at Nanjing. You're at the peak of the deity realm too, and you can comprehend the energy of yin and yang here too. Your natural talent is superior to his, so I believe that it won't take long for you to succeed. And Nanjing nodded slightly. Thank you. Obviously, if the powers in the outside world found out about this place, countless experts would definitely go mad trying to obtain access to this place. After all, it was no different than a shortcut to advance into the dualism realm. Blood Maiden glanced at them and said, I won't disturb you any longer. I'll come in 10 days. She turned around and left. Once she left, and Nanjing immediately sat down cross-legged. Meanwhile, Yang Yi suddenly said, Don't cultivate here. Let's head inside. As soon as he finished speaking, he took her hand and brought her into the 3rd level of the primordial pagoda. He naturally intended to cultivate in the primordial pagoda. He only had 10 days. Comprehend the energy of yin and yang, and then advance within 10 days? It wasn't realistic. It was only possible in the primordial pagoda. If they cultivated in the primordial pagoda, it represented that they had over 3 months of time. The more time they had, the higher their chances of advancing was. Even though they were within the primordial pagoda, it didn't affect their comprehension of the energy of yin and yang in the surroundings. Because Yang Yi was within that space, so they could sense the energy of yin and yang in the world outside. Comprehension. After that, both of them started comprehending the energy of yin and yang. Needless to say, Yang Yi didn't really like this method of cultivation. Simply speaking, based on his character, it was really quite painful to sit here all day and sense the energy of yin and yang in the world outside. So, Yang Yi started to spar with a Nanjing after a few days passed. And Nanjing naturally had no objections to that because she'd wanted to spar with Yang Yi for a long time. In the primordial pagoda, and Nanjing held Sky Split in her grasp while a calm expression covered her face. Yang Yi was standing not too far away from her. He was holding the sword precursor, and it was glowing. Both of them exchanged glances in midair, and then they vanished on the spot. Clang! The sound of metal colliding resounded. The space in the surroundings shook violently, and then Yang Yi and a Nanjing split apart. However, it only took a moment for them to collide once more. They were just exchanging blows, and they didn't utilize the intents they possessed. A Nanjing's instinct in combat was formidable, and Yang Yi possessed the enlightened sword heart. He could extremely quickly locate a Nanjing's flaws. However, at the instant he launched his attacks, she seemed like she knew what he would do, and she was always able to be a step ahead of him. Needless to say, Yang Yi felt quite aggrieved throughout the battle. Xiao Yushi was staring at them without blinking. Yang Yi and a Nanjing's fight was definitely extremely interesting. Even though they weren't using their true strength, it was also the reason why it was so interesting. It was a competition of instinct. It could be said that anyone who fought them in close quarters would suffer. After fighting for a long time, Yang Yi started to fight shamelessly, and it was by fighting without defending himself. He'd abandoned his defenses, and as soon as he did that, the situation immediately started to turn in favor of him. Because a Nanjing had to be careful. After all, she didn't possess a body as strong as Yang Ye's, and it was impossible for her to fight like Yang Yi. Around 2 hours later, both of them stopped. A victor hadn't been decided. Actually, it was impossible to decide on a victor, because both of them had held back during the battle, and they didn't launch lethal strikes. Moreover, at their level of strength, deciding on a victor represented they had to decide on who lived and who died. In the next few days, they started to comprehend the energy of yin and yang every single day. In the beginning, Yang Yi was actually unable to sense anything besides air, but a Nanjing said that she sensed it. That was the gap between them in terms of natural talent. However, it didn't take long for Yang Yi to sense it as well, because he'd used the sword domain. As soon as the sword domain swept out, everything could escape his notice. However, sensing it didn't represent that they could advance into the dualism realm. They had to comprehend it and fully grasp it. Only then could they advance. Advancing from the deity realm to the dualism realm relied on comprehension. If one couldn't comprehend the energy of yin and yang, then it would be impossible to advance even if one cultivated every single day. 2 months passed by, but there was no movement from Yang Yi or Nanjing. One day, Little Sky suddenly came to the 3rd level. Little Sky asked, "They are still comprehending?" Xiao Yushi nodded. Little Sky puckered her lips. "How boring. Unless it's sleeping, I would never do something like sitting there every day." Xiao Yushi glanced at her and spoke softly. "Cultivating is the only way to avoid being bullied." "That's true." Little Sky spoke softly. "I should make Little Sky and the others cultivate too, or they'll always be bullied by humans." Xiao Yushi's eyelids raised slightly. She naturally knew what Little Sky was. She fell silent for a moment, and then she said, "Eyes of the Heaven Tao can become even stronger too?" "Of course." Little Sky continued. "However, they don't really like to cultivate. It's mainly because their intelligence hasn't fully formed. Once they possess intelligence comparable to humans, they'll understand how they can make themselves stronger. It requires time. Forget it. I'm going to enjoy myself." She was about to leave, but she suddenly gazed at a Nanjing. At this moment, a terrifying aura had suddenly surged out from a Nanjing, but it didn't take long for the aura to be retracted. Xiao Yushi asked, "The dualism realm?" And Nanjing opened her eyes slowly, and then she let out a mouthful of foul air. After that, she gazed at Xiao Yushi and nodded slightly. The dualism realm. Xiao Yushi was visibly moved. She hadn't expected a Nanjing to advance so quickly. Her natural talent is truly heaven-defying. Little Sky suddenly walked over to a Nanjing. She sized up a Nanjing and said, "Tsk, the martial god physique. Your physique is amazing." And Nanjing glanced at Little Sky. "Who are you?" "Little Sky." Little Sky chuckled. "Little like big and little, sky like the sky above." She sized up a Nanjing while she spoke, and then she continued, "Your physique isn't bad. However, a good physique can only be considered as a good starting point. It mainly depends on whether you work hard. I can see that you've worked very hard. Besides that, you're much smarter than that stupid fellow, Yang Yi. That stupid fellow still hasn't attained the dualism realm. What a failure." As soon as she finished speaking, she placed her hands behind her back and strolled out of the cultivation room. And Nanjing gazed at Xiao Yushi. "Who is she?" Xiao Yushi fell silent for an instant, and then she said, "A strange little girl who can summon the eyes of the Heaven Tao to fight for her." And Nanjing was stunned speechless. Time trickled by. In the blink of an eye, a month had passed, but Yang Yi still showed no signs of completing his cultivation. Meanwhile, Blood Maiden had arrived, and Nanjing and Xiao Yushi left the primordial pagoda, and Blood Maiden was standing in front of them. Blood Maiden asked, "Where is he?" And Nanjing shook her head. "He isn't done." Blood Maiden frowned slightly. "There's no more time. 10 days are up." Xiao Yushi suddenly asked, "Should I wake him up?" "No." Blood Maiden shook her head. "It's the critical moment right now, so waking him up might cause all his efforts to be wasted." Xiao Yushi spoke softly. Then, Blood Maiden glanced at Xiao Yushi and a Nanjing, and then she said, "Yushi, stay here with him." And Nanjing, "Come with me." Xiao Yushi asked, Where are you going? Blood Maiden's eyes narrowed slightly. Coiling Dragon Mountain. And Nanjing asked, what about your sisters? They're on the way. We're going first. As soon as she finished speaking, Blood Maiden grabbed Nanjing's shoulder and vanished on the spot. Around 2 hours after they left, Yang Yi suddenly opened his eyes. Bang! At the instant his eyes were opened, a terrifying aura surged out from within him, and the space around him instantly started rippling. It didn't take long for the aura to surge back into Yang Yi like a receding tide. Xiao Yushi hurriedly walked over to Yang Yi and asked softly, the dualism realm? Yang Yi took a deep breath and nodded. He'd finally attained the dualism realm. Now, ordinary rebirth realm experts were no threat to him. Xiao Yushi heaved a sigh of relief when she knew that he'd attained the dualism realm. Because Yang Ye's overall strength had definitely improved tremendously. That represented that Yang Yi would have a better chance at victory against that mysterious power. Yang Yi glanced at the surroundings and asked, where's a Nanjing? Suddenly, Xiao Yushi seemed to have thought of something, and she hurriedly said, hurry! They've gone ahead. Yang Yi was stunned. It didn't take long for him to recall that 10 days had passed. Yang Yi was about to leave when he suddenly asked, where did they go? She replied, Coiling Dragon Mountain. Yang Yi asked, where's that? Xiao Yushi was at a loss for words. It didn't take long for Yang Ye's face to become quite unsightly because he didn't know where it was. Sky Continent wasn't very peaceful today. The Emperor Sect. An unwelcome guest suddenly arrived at the Emperor Sect. It was a woman. She wore a linen dress, and her eyes were closed. Based on her outward appearance, there was nothing special about her. She went straight into the sky above the Emperor Sect. At the same time, an old man at the rebirth realm instantly appeared before her. The old man gazed at her and frowned. Who are you? Why have you trespassed into my Emperor Sect's territory? I'm here for payback. As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly opened her eyes. As soon as that happened, a red thread suddenly shot out from each of her eyes. At this moment, the light throughout the sky seemed to have vanished. Or to be more precise, the light in an area of over 10,000 kilometers had vanished, and the entire area had fallen into darkness. The red threads were the only source of light. The red threads were extremely swift. They shot through the old man's body before he could even react, and then they shot into the Emperor Sect on the ground below. Bang! A loud explosion resounded through the surroundings. Some time later, light gradually returned to the area above the Emperor Sect. However, the entire Emperor Sect had been transformed into ruins. Moreover, there wasn't a single living person left there. Tens of thousands had perished. The War Pavilion. While the Emperor Sect was being annihilated, 2 women came to the War Pavilion. One of them had a ghastly pale countenance, and her entire body was filled with monstrous resentment and slaughter intent. As for the other woman, she was riding a huge white pig, and she carried a large saber on her shoulder. Once they appeared in the air above the War Pavilion, a Rebirth Realm expert from the War Pavilion immediately appeared before them. That Rebirth Realm expert frowned. Have we met? Why do both of you look familiar to me? Of course. The woman with the saber laughed coldly. Know the Nether Pavilion? The old man's expression changed drastically. You? He hadn't even finished speaking when he seemed to have thought of something, and he immediately turned around with the intention of fleeing. Meanwhile, the woman who rode the pig and the other woman attacked abruptly. A huge saber tore through the air towards the old man. At the same time, a strand of terrifying slaughter intent and baleful energy instantly enveloped the entire War Pavilion. In an instant, the entire War Pavilion became hell on earth. The Emperor Sect and War Pavilion weren't the only ones. Many other powers suffered annihilation at the same time. It didn't take long for everyone throughout the continent to be aware that the Nether Pavilion had come back up to the large world. The Nether Pavilion. The Nether Pavilion, which once instilled fear in countless powers, had returned to the large world for payback. So, countless powers felt a sense of danger. At the same time, the other races became vigilant and strictly prohibited their members from entering the human territory. Obviously, they didn't want to get mixed up in all of it. The Nether Pavilion's arrival represented that Sky continent wouldn't be at peace anymore. The slaughter was still continuing in the human territory, and powers were vanishing from the continent in succession. 4 hours later, Blood Maiden and a Nanjing arrived at a mountain range. The mountain range was huge. If one looked down at it from the sky above, one would notice that it was like a huge dragon coiled on the ground. And Nanjing asked, "They are in there?" Blood Maiden nodded. "Be careful later." They sped up. It didn't take long for them to stop because a middle-aged man with a spear on his back had suddenly appeared in front of them. And Nanjing had a solemn expression on her face when she saw the middle-aged man. She'd met the middle-aged man the other day. At that time, she felt that he was extremely dangerous. Now, she still felt that he was extremely dangerous. "Master wants you to see some things first." The man vanished on the spot once he finished speaking. Blood Maiden grabbed a Nanjing's shoulder and followed the middle-aged man. Around 15 minutes later, Blood Maiden and a Nanjing stopped. There were 10 graves not too far away from them. The graves were linked together, and every single one of them had a tombstone. There were words inscribed on the tombstones as well. There were 2 words inscribed on the tombstone on the far left: Sky Maiden. The second tombstone had Blood Maiden inscribed on it. The third had Blind Maiden. The names of all 10 of them were inscribed on those tombstones. The man with a spear on his back gazed at Blood Maiden. "Master said that only all of your corpses are missing." Blood Maiden laughed coldly. "Don't worry. We'll allow her to understand what it's like to dig her own grave." As soon as she finished speaking, she gazed at the middle-aged man. "Take me to see your master." The middle-aged man nodded slightly. He didn't waste his breath and just started walking off into the distance. It didn't take long for them to arrive before a bamboo house. At the same time, a woman holding a feather fan walked out from it. The woman gazed at Blood Maiden and smiled. "You actually caused such a commotion upon returning. Fortunately, all of it was within my expectations." Blood Maiden gazed at the woman for a long time, and then she said, "Fanning you. It's time to put an end to the enmity between us." The woman with a feather fan, fanning you, nodded slightly. "It should. I made a mistake in my plans and allowed all of you to escape to the lower dimensions. This time, it won't happen again." Blood Maiden said, "All those years ago, we suffered from your schemes and weren't able to converge together. You crushed us one by one. This time, you've specially gathered us here. So, I presume you're very confident." Fanning you grinned. "It's not about confidence. I just don't want to waste more time." She suddenly looked up at the sky and remained silent for a long time. "I don't sense your eldest sister, Sky Maiden's aura. What? Is she still not going to come?" As soon as she finished speaking, 9 rays of light appeared in the sky, and they descended by Blood Maiden's side. The light dispersed to reveal Blind Maiden and the others. And Nanjing glanced at them, and her heart shook, because she noticed that the weakest amongst them was at the dualism realm. Or it should be said that only one of them was at the dualism realm, and it was the pig-riding young woman. As for the rest, even Nether Maiden was in the rebirth realm. All of them were at the rebirth realm. Fanning you glanced at them and nodded. "No wonder you dared to come up here. So it's because all of you've recovered your past strength. Right, it has been so long. If you still hadn't recovered, then you would really be disappointing." She paused for a moment and continued, "Unfortunately, it's still not enough. Wouldn't we only know that after we fight?" Blood Maiden stepped forward. "Fanning you, how about we spar for a while?" Fanning you shook her head. "My opponent is your eldest sister. Only she has the right to be my opponent. I have no intention of insulting you, and it's merely a fact." Meanwhile, the middle-aged man with a spear on his back stepped forward. "Blood Maiden, if you want to spar, I can accompany you." Blood Maiden glanced at him, and then a blood-red ray of light shot forward. It was extremely swift and instantly arrived before the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man's expression didn't change at all. He clenched his right fist and slammed it forward. Bang! An explosion resounded, and the blood-red ray of light shattered. Meanwhile, Blood Maiden suddenly appeared before the middle-aged man. In an instant, a terrifying wave of pressure slammed down upon him. At the same time, the middle-aged man swiftly slapped his palm forward. Boom! The space around him shook violently while the pressure Blood Maiden emanated instantly vanished. A moment later, the sound of palms colliding resounded. After that, Blood Maiden returned to where she had been standing, and the middle-aged man had moved almost 10 back. Blood Maiden's eyes narrowed slightly. Suddenly, a ray of light appeared in the sky. It didn't take long for the ray of light to descend by Blood Maiden's side. The light dispersed to reveal Xianxia's figure. Xianxia glanced at the surroundings and said, "Great! I'm not late." Little Sky was naturally the reason why he'd been able to find this place. Nether Maiden suddenly said, "The dualism realm?" Xianxia nodded. He sized her up and said, "You're at the rebirth realm?" She nodded. "I've fully recovered my strength." Xianxia nodded slightly. He wasn't surprised because Nether Maiden wasn't like him or a Nanjing. After all, Nether Maiden had been a rebirth realm expert in the past. Suddenly, Fanning Yu said, "Since your eldest sister isn't coming, then I'll deal with all of you first. Once I'm done, I think she'll definitely show herself." "Stop!" Suddenly, a voice resounded here. As soon as the voice finished resounding, a ray of white light flashed from Xianxia's chest, and then Little Sky appeared here. Little Sky glanced at the surroundings. In the end, her gaze descended onto Fanning Yu. "You can't fight here. All of you are too strong. If you fight here, you'll destroy the continent. No, it might even be obliterated." Fanning Yu chuckled. "What if I insist?" Little Sky suddenly walked towards Fanning Yu. It didn't take long for her to arrive in front of Fanning Yu. And then she looked Fanning Yu in the eyes. "I'll kill anyone who dares to fight here." As she spoke, she stretched out her hand and tapped Fanning Yu's chest. "Do you want to give it a try?"